Hey everybody, so welcome back to Jim Bob's Garden. So today I want to talk about compost. So I tried an experiment, and this is the compost bin that was up in my greenhouse. So I want to show you something, and let me pull this up. Alright, so the idea was that this was supposed to make nice hot compost and heat my compost bin. Alright, heat up the greenhouse. But as you can see, the temperature is basically the ambient temperature. It's like 70 degrees out here right now. In the greenhouse it was like 75, 80. So you can see it's exactly the same as the ambient temperature. And over here I have my other compost pile. And you can see the needles going up. Though this compost has cooled down, it is at least 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the compost in the small compost bin. So, what does that tell me? So, basically what that tells me is, one, this is not the heat source that I'd wanted. But now, why? That's a good question. It could be that the mixture isn't right. But I will tell you that when you do a compost pile, all right, it's much better to have it at least 3 foot wide, so that that has more space for the bacteria to grow and build up inside of the compost. Now, two, I've got a lot of leaves. Now, leaves, if they're not cut up, they're a very brown material, and they don't really break down as well when they're full. I mean, you can see that, if you go into a forest, you'll find these leaves sitting there, for a good long time after they've fallen off the tree, because it takes a while for them to get tore apart and eventually rot down into good solid compost or soil. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take this compost and we're going to empty it out over into my actual compost bin. Alright, so let me see if I can do that here. And then we're going to fix this compost, get it heating back up again, hopefully, and then try this experiment one more time. Now it smells kind of rotten. It smells like it's trying to break down. Matter of fact, that's kind of gone out anaerobic. So, and I have taken this compost out and mixed in. You can see there's some paper, shredded paper in there. There's some dollarweed in there. So I tried to mix some green in. Man, it's just so not rotting down. I mean, if it was cooking at all of this dollarweed roots would be brown and dead. So, like I had said before, the mixture wasn't great. It does have some household compost into it. But it just is not creating the heat that I'd hoped for. Now, all is not lost. I still have a I don't know if that's just too wet. But I still have a method to get it to break down. We'll go ahead and put it all in here. We'll mix it in with the other stuff. And I have a small heater in the meantime to keep the bin, or I'm sorry, to keep the greenhouse warm. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and also take my compost bin over here. I'm going to open this up. Basically mix that in with the other compost that was in the bucket. And then in addition to that, I'm going to throw in some charcoal. So come on over here. Okay, so now I burned a lot of wood from my wood pile that's almost done. In the attempt to make biochar. So what I've done in the past is I have taken and put water on the charcoal to put the fire out so it wouldn't just turn into ash. So this time I thought I would try putting dirt on it and smothering it that way. Well, one, it took longer to kill it, but it does look like we have a pretty good amount of charcoal under here. All right, and I'm going to take this as we go along, and I'm going to add that in to the compost pile. Dust. All right, so we'll leave the big chunks like this that haven't burned all the way down. All right, so using the dirt, I don't know if that was really more effective than just using water. I think I'll just go back to the water and just use a little less. The problem with the water is then it's got to dry out. So what I'm going to do is I will take about a shovel full, maybe 2 of the charcoal, which is going to be mixed with ashes and it's going to be mixed with some of the dirt. And then I'm going to get my handy dandy stomper, crunch it down a little bit to try and make the pieces a bit smaller. You can back up. Then I'll take this and I will add it into my compost like so. Smell like ashes?
It still smells like alligator.
Does it? So now that the dust is cleared, so the goal is to get that charcoal into the compost mix, and that will absorb up some of the bacteria that are growing in there. And then I'll take and I'll bring layers of this over. And cover it up. Like so. Though I will be using my wheelbarrow, or my wagon actually. And then, so once I get a good layer of that, then I'll take all this shredded paper, which is all of our, junk mail and such, and I'll sprinkle it around and try and incorporate all of this 2 bags worth of shredded paper will get incorporated into the compost. And then once I get a good enough layer, I'll go through it with my road tiller and grind it up a little bit. So just like so. I'll mix it up, add more layers, keep layering it in, keep mixing it in, adding charcoal, the paper, until we get a nice compost pile going here. That'll be the 3 foot by 3 foot that we need, much like was what I had over there. That one was heating up, where this one would not heat up. that one was heating up to 130 degrees initially. Now it's cooled down some, so it needs to be stirred. Once it gets back down to normal temperature, that's when it's time to start stirring things up. All right, it's been 11 days since I mixed up this compost. I took the compost that I had that was starting to cool down, put it in this pile here, got it all stirred in with the rototiller, and then what I did is I took that same compost to do like an experiment, a fairly scientific experiment. I took the compost that I mixed up in here and put it in this bin, and I'm going to show you how the size matters. All right, so let's look at the temperature. So right now, the ambient temperature is right about 80 degrees. All right, so let's take a look at the different piles. All right, so this pile here with my temperature probe, which by the way, if you're doing compost and you don't have one of these, I picked this up for 20 bucks on Amazon. It was very well worth the money. All right, so you can see this pile here has gotten up to about almost 115 degrees. Now I had checked this earlier in the week and it was up to around 120, so it's starting to cool back down again. So it's time to start maybe mixing it up. I'm going to take this pile and move it over there here in a little bit. All right, but let's look at the pile that's in my little bin over here. So in my small compost bin, my little trash can bin here, you can see that the temperature has come down to ambient temperature. Maybe a degree or two above, but it looks like pretty much ambient temperature. The same temperature that it is outside. Now what does that tell you? That tells you that nothing's going on in here. All right? Yeah, actually it's right down to exactly the ambient temperature. So let's look at this other pile. Now this pile is just leaves and a few other things that I mowed up and chopped down. And again, you can see it's also at ambient temperature. So there's no real bacterial action going on in here in the same way that there isn't any bacterial action going on in my little compost bin. So what does that tell you? Well, there's a couple of things you can take from this. One, size matters. All right, having a larger pile of the same compost as what I have in here. Here I've got almost 3 foot by 3 foot. Here I might have 1.5 foot. That size actually matters when it comes to getting that bacterial growth growing, and that bacterial growth, which creates the heat. All right, and the heat is just an indication that you've got bacterial action going on inside and a rotting down process. So that tells you that because these are the same exact compost, I've stirred it all together, took compost out of this pile, put it in this bin, and nothing happened. It didn't break down. It didn't actually do anything. I mean, eventually it'll break down, just like anything else in nature. It'll eventually rot down. But if you're trying to make compost quickly and generate heat, which was the whole purpose behind this, then you need something a little bigger. Now there are other ways that I could go about doing it. In the same way that nothing's going on in there, that's all brown. That is nothing but dead brown material, and as a result there's nothing there for the bacteria to really feed on. I mean, eventually it'll break down, but it might take a year or two. If I let it sit there and just don't mess with it, it'll break down over time. Now what I'm going to do today is I'm going to mix in some other green stuff, some kitchen waste that we have and so on, add a little bit of water and try and get that to start so that I'll have a new starter pile. Then I'm going to take this pile and move it over here, stir it up a little bit so that it'll actually continue to break down. Though it's turning into some pretty nice compost. I mean, it is breaking down. And it's looking better. It's not quite there yet, but we're looking pretty good. Probably, say another 10-15 days. Basically by the middle of next month, I should easily have a nice batch of compost to put on my garden. So that's one thing. is, you know, I want to keep creating more so that I can keep adding it to my soil, so I can keep enriching the soil. But really the key is the size matters, okay? You got to have a good sized pile. Now, if I had a lot of green, if I had a lot of grass clippings, which I don't right now because everything's still brown and dead, the grass hasn't really started to grow yet, the more green I put into it, the hotter that pile will get. I mean, I've seen these piles so hot you could barely touch them. I didn't have a thermometer at that point to really determine how hot it was, but it was hotter than the water in our house, which is at 140 degrees. So I'm assuming somewhere around 160, 165 degrees. So incorporating the various different materials helps a ton. Having something green to put in there makes a huge difference. You can take a pile of grass clippings, come back the next day, and it'll be hot. All right, whereas this brown stuff that I put over here is not reacting at all. It's completely just ambient temperature that we have outside right now. So you got to have that mixture, one, to get the pile to really fire off and go, and two, it works a lot better if you have a large 3 foot by 3 foot pile. You know, a good 3 foot cube is really what you're looking at. And in fact, this is actually not quite 3 foot. I think it's 30 inches, if I'm not mistaken, across, and it's not quite 3 foot tall. It's probably about 30 inches tall as well. All right, but it works great. That's plenty big enough for it to actually start to break down and do a good job. I love my concrete block compost bins. They've done fantastic for me. So, a couple things to take away. One, if you're going to build a compost bin, make it around 3 foot by 3 foot. Try and keep your pile about 3 foot tall. Size matters. Two, a good mixture of greens and browns makes a huge difference, all right? As well as moisture. There's no moisture in that pile either, and once again, it has not started to react. All right, that's how I go about building my compost, and the compost is how I go about building my soil. I don't use any fertilizer. I don't use any additives other than compost in my garden, and everything is growing very well. I've been very pleased so far. Matter of fact, later on today, I'm probably going to shoot a midwinter update to show you kind of where we're looking at, or how we're looking. But it's looking pretty good. I mean, actually, I've got a lot of good things growing, and I'm feeling pretty good about this year. Okay, so if you're going to make a compost pile, mix it up. All right, get your layers going, or at least get your greens as much as possible mixed in with your browns. All right, but the bigger thing is make sure it's a good size. This experiment with my bin so far has been a failure. Now I'm going to play around with it some more and try and get this to heat up, see what makes it heat up, and then see what I can do about making sure by next winter I'll have what I need to get a good hot compost pile going inside of this bin so that it'll actually heat up my greenhouse and I don't have to use my little heater. Alright, thanks once again for stopping by. Get some compost growing. It's a fantastic thing. This cost me nothing. Actually, nothing. Alright, it's completely waste of one sort or another. Grass clippings, weeds from the garden. Basically, just whatever I've got laying around that will break down into compost. Alright, and it's a fantastic thing for your garden. Get a compost bin started. Would be my recommendation, and use that for your fertilizer in your garden. So, thanks once again for stopping by. Do me a favor, give me a like and a subscribe, and let me know what you think. But most importantly, grow something, and including your soil. Grow your soil. The better your soil is, the more you're going to have your produce produce. All right. Thanks once again. Y'all take care. Come back and see me.